Our session starts momentarily. First, a few very brief announcements. Please note that in today's live stream session, we will not be opening audio or video lines for our attendees, but we do very much welcome your questions and comments. If you have them, we'd love to hear from you. And we'd like you to type any comments or questions that you have in the chat window. You'll see it just below the video display window on your screen. Also, you may email your questions and comments to us directly at support@salesmanagement.org. We'll put that email address up to remind you later in the session. Also, as a reminder, today's webcast will be recorded. We'll make it available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library. Our members will also be able to find copies of today's slides available for download there. Our session today is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. If you're joining us for the first time, we'd like to welcome you and remind you that the Sales Management Association is a professional association for sales operations, sales enablement, and sales leadership professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. So we encourage you to look around while you're here and consider membership in the association. I'm Bob Kelly. It's my pleasure today to introduce one of my favorite speakers, Michelle Vazzana. I'd like to do that now. Michelle Vazzana is co-founder and chief strategy officer at VantagePoint Performance, a global sales training and development firm. She is co-author of the highly regarded book, Cracking the Sales Management Code, and recently published an additional book on sales coaching. That's called Crushing Quota. She's a frequent speaker on sales leadership topics, and she is among our most highly rated speakers at our web and in-person events. It's my pleasure to welcome Michelle Vazzana. Thanks for being, let's see if we can find you, Michelle.
Thanks.
There you are.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us again today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always enjoy working with the Sales Management Association, and I'm particularly excited about the topic that we're going to be covering today. So let me know when you'd like for me to get started.
The floor is yours.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So I'm excited on many levels to be talking with you about this topic of sales agility. And the reason is because there's a lot of buzz about agility in the marketplace. And quite frankly, it's a grounds for confusion. So I'd like to really be able to share the research behind sales agility, the research perspectives that are evidence-based around sales agility, and maybe clear up some of the misconceptions that are being bandied about in the marketplace that quite frankly could confuse you as the consumer of sales agility training solutions. So let's start by defining agility. What is it anyway? When we say sales agility, what do we mean? So when we talk about agility, we're really talking about the ability to adapt, adjust behavior based on changes in the situation an individual is facing. So there's agility in sales, there's agility in sports, there's agility in medicine, there's agility in the military, there's agility in lots of different environments. But if we talk about agility in sales, we're really talking about the ability to adapt sales behavior based on changes in the customer situation. And we introduced this idea of sales agility in something called situational fluency back in early 2017. And we're actually pretty thrilled and flattered that the sales training industry has really jumped all over that. And lots of sales training companies are talking about sales agility. So we think that's fantastic. We're glad that they agree with this idea. We also want to make sure that we help you clear up any confusion about what is agility and what is it not. And so with this idea of agility in mind and this idea of situational fluency, I thought it might be really useful to share with you some of the dynamics that are unfolding in the situations that your salespeople face. And I'm going to share some really interesting and powerful research from Gartner about the kinds of situations that sellers are facing in today's very complex buying environment. What we know from Gartner is that because of increases in thought leadership and data and analytics, the customers are exposed to a lot of high quality, credible information, which means that for you as a seller, powerful messaging is no longer enough, because any claim that you make in very short order will likely be made by your competitors as well. So what's the downside for sellers and buyers in this information rich and yet often insight poor environment? Well, 55% of customers say they're encountering far too much information in their sales journey. In fact, not only are they overwhelmed by the amount of information they're facing, 44% of buyers, when surveyed by Gartner, said a lot of it conflicts. It's credible, but it conflicts. So what am I supposed to do? How do I rationalize this information to be able to make decisions, better decisions? So this overabundance of information and conflicting messaging, it's confusing customers. And customers are saying, it's making it more and more difficult for me as a buyer or a buying team to make high quality, low risk decisions and make trade-offs between vendors and their capabilities. So ultimately, as a seller, what this does, it reduces the chances of you making a viable sale by as much as 66%. Wow. I mean, it's not the impact we're looking for when we come up with good messaging. It's not the impact we're looking for when we build powerful customer stories. We want to clarify things for the customer, not confuse them. But we're all out there trying to clarify things in different ways. And so Gartner also found there's 3 primary ways that sellers share information with buyers, some of which are more effective than others. And let's take a peek in the window at what those are. So the first way that sellers share information is what's called being a giver. And from Gartner's perspective, a giver is someone who's very highly responsive to customer requests for information, and they continually provide more and more information. And their perspective on sharing information is that more is better. The more information I share with my buyers, the better educated they'll be. Well, that's not working out so well. So this whole idea of being a giver is met with not very good reception. So in addition to the giver, the next type of information sharer is the teller. Think the challenger sale. Think developing very specific point of view and aggressively sharing that point of view with your buyer to shape their thinking. It's almost the opposite of the giver. So the giver is broad, more is better. The teller is narrow, less is better. But really, there's some kind of a combination of these. And the profile that Gartner has found that's the most effective is called the sense maker. So sense makers, their primary goal is to simplify things for the customer, to look at the broader environment that the customer is facing, consider the different information points out there, and help the customer coalesce, simplify, and make sense of what the customer is facing. So you're probably guessing this sense maker really is the most effective way to deal with and manage information with your buyer. So what does sense making have to do with sales agility? Well, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace right now about sales agility. What is it? Where does it come from? How do we know? And what is your evidence? So in order to help you make sense of sales agility, we'd like to kind of start with the punchline. And the punchline is that after 12 years of research on this very topic, what we've been able to do at VantagePoint is we've been able to identify 3 separate and discrete yet related levels of sales agility within the sales force. And we're going to unpack each one of these levels of agility and the research behind it so that you can walk away from this webinar with higher clarity around what does sales agility mean? What does it mean for my sales force? And how can I avoid being misled by a lot of noise that's in the marketplace? So speaking about the noise in the marketplace, there are some very common yet misleading perspectives on sales agility. And again, we are thrilled that people are talking about it. We're thrilled that everyone in our industry is getting on the bandwagon. But again, that creates a ripe environment for confusion. So there's a couple of misperceptions that I'd like to unpack along with the research as we go through this presentation. The first one of these misperceptions is that the buyer's position in the buying process and effort oriented toward different buying personas is at the heart of sales agility. And while that's partially true, it's inadequate, right? It's only a piece of the story, not the whole story. There's another common misperception out there in our marketplace that agile software development is similar to, in an appropriate context, for sales agility. And we're going to examine that and identify why it's intuitively appealing, but fundamentally inaccurate. So let's go ahead and start down this research journey so that you can understand how did VantagePoint, with this large body of research, reach these conclusions about these different levels of agility. What's our evidence? The first series of studies that we did had to do with sales management and sales leadership. And our questions were around, is there one best way to coach and manage the sales force? And if so, what is it, right? Is there one best way to coach? Is there one best way to measure? And after multiple research studies over an 8-year period, what we found is regarding sales metrics, the way sales organizations manage sales performance, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Which metrics should you be tracking and managing to? Well, it depends. It depends which business results you're targeting, which sales objectives and KPIs are necessary to achieve those results, and which sales activities must be executed consistently well to achieve those objectives. So that was one of the first major studies that we did around sales management and leadership that pointed to the need for agility in the way leaders manage. And then we led a series of studies on sales coaching. What kind of coaching matters, and how do managers that are the highest performers coach those things that matter most? One of the studies that we did was around sales coaching. And we examined 3 very popular types of coaching that are available and abundant in the marketplace today. We examined capability coaching, think coaching to competencies, think the GROW model, that sort of thing. We examined coaching to results, think pipeline scrubbing and forecasting. We also examined coaching to activities, which is really about influencing seller actions and behaviors. And the interesting thing about research is that when you go into your research studies, of course you have some hypotheses. But if you're honest, if you're a rigorous researcher, more often than not, your hypotheses are not going to be supported. So for example, one of our hypotheses going into this research was that capability coaching will be probably the most powerful and impactful and most highly correlated to objective quota attainment. Well, that's not what we found. Surprise, surprise, what we found was coaching to capabilities only accounted for about 2% of the variance in quota attainment. It was almost negligible. When we looked at coaching to results, that accounted for far more variance, 10%, but still not statistically significant. It was only activity coaching that was meaningfully, significantly, and positively correlated to quota attainment. And so we know that when it comes to coaching to activities is where managers are going to get their best outcomes. Which activities should we coach to? Well, again, it depends. We did another set of studies that examined managers that coach to activities. How do they actually do that? How frequently do they coach? What's the duration of their coaching? What's the formality of their coaching? What topics do they cover? And ultimately, we landed on a framework for agility for the organization that encompasses 3 primary elements. The first element is organizations that are agile consistently align salesperson activities to desired organizational results. There's consistent alignment. Leaders that are agile also consistently coach to those high impact activities. And then they assess leading indicators of progress to determine, are we on the right track or are we not on the right track? And what adjustments do we need to make? The key theme here is adjustments and agility. So what we've just shared with you is a series of research studies that uncovered this first lever or layer of sales agility, which we call organizational agility. And this is an organization's ability to match marketplace realities and sales execution to organizational goals and desired results. And that linkage what sets organizations up for better sales execution. Now, regarding sales execution, you might be thinking, all right, what is this idea of sales agility? How is this impacted, or how does it impact sales execution? And for these series of studies, the initial studies were originated at the Florida State University Sales Institute. We were honored to partner with them and bring this research into VantagePoint. And what they found that was phenomenally interesting is they examined three primary things about salesperson execution. The first question was, is there one methodology that is the most successful? And if so, what is it? Is it challenger? Is it value selling? Is it consultative selling? What is it? And when we think about methodology, do high performers, are they the ones most likely to adopt a single methodology or not? And finally, if they actually adapt, does adapting to the environment actually increase win rates? And so some really interesting things came out of this initial research, which quite frankly have been validated and expanded by VantagePoint, so we know it's real. One of the findings was that the highest performing sellers don't have one primary methodology. They actually exhibit 4 different strategies of selling or 4 patterns of sales behavior. Consultative, think spin selling. Disruptive, think the challenger sale. And financial and competitive. Financial, think ROI. Competitive, think, I'm going to bake out or bake off. How am I going to win? So high performers exhibited 4 patterns of selling behavior, not one. So if you've had consultative selling, good for you. That's meaningful and necessary. If you've had some challenger training, that's fantastic. That is perfectly in line with this disruptive strategy, right? So a lot of the efforts that organizations have put into enabling their sales force are actually quite relevant. And so there's these 4 patterns that are alive and well. But how do high-performing sellers determine which pattern of selling behavior to utilize in any given opportunity at any given time? Well, the buying factors or attributes of the buying situation they face really help them understand and codify what is it I'm facing and how do I know, and then what do I do about it? So these buying factors matter. In the Florida State University Sales Institute, the team of researchers there, they studied over 25 buying factors that were relevant to the deals they analyzed. And some of the research conclusions then are that every sales force faces between 4 and 6 unique buying situations that are defined by a set of buying factors. In addition, sellers, high-performing sellers, display 4 patterns of selling behavior, not one. And what we also know is that high performers choose different strategies based on the situation they face. Low and average performers use only one strategy, and that's typically the one they were trained on. So when you think about the implications of that, it's a little daunting, because if you've really invested a ton of money into, say, consultative selling, well, that's effective about 25% of the time. What do you do the other 75% of the time, right? So it doesn't mean these investments will not pay off. They're relevant and they're meaningful, but it's important to put them in the context of what they mean from an agility perspective. So when we think about this idea of situational fluency, and we think about high-performing sellers that adapt to the situation they face and select the pattern of selling behavior that is most relevant, we've termed that situational agility. It's the ability to assess many buying factors, evaluate and make sense of those buying factors, and then select and execute the strategy that is most relevant to that buying situation. And people that aren't very curious might stop there. Organizations that aren't very curious, that are in the sales enablement space, might say, okay, that's enough. Great findings, very innovative, very interesting. Let's sell the heck out of this. But here's what we found. Anytime you take findings from an academic arena that are academically interesting, it doesn't make them completely commercially viable. So as we've been examining this sales agility framework and these findings over the last 4 years, what we found is there's actually more to the story. We've gathered data on thousands of deals, wins and losses, very granular details about the buying situations, the specific tactics used, and some more really interesting findings have come out of these studies. So there's more to the story. So the next set of studies was done by VantagePoint, not only to validate the findings of the Florida State University Sales Institute, because you don't just want to take someone's word for it, right? You want to find evidence. And so we not only validated the findings that each client has 4 to 6 unique buying situations and high-performing sellers adapt, we also started asking more questions and interrogating the data. And one of the questions we asked was, of these over 25 buying factors, are there any patterns in these buying factors? How do they work together? Because going to a sales force and saying, all you have to do is learn these 25 things and you'll be good, isn't really a viable message. It is not a viable methodology. So we started interrogating the data to say, all right, what are the patterns within these buying factors and what do they mean for Salesforce agility? We also analyzed these 4 patterns of selling behavior to determine how do they relate to each other? And are there foundational elements that drive more advanced elements? So before we share our findings, I want to go back to one of the sort of misperceptions about sales agility. And that sort of misperception is that situational fluency is about flexing to the buyer's position in their buying journey and orienting effort toward different buyer personas. We don't think that's wrong. We think that's a very important part, but only a small part of the broader sales agility story. So when it comes to buying factors, what did we find? When we interrogated those over 25 buying factors, what we realized is that those buying factors, they fit into 5 very specific patterns of buying factor categories: problem awareness, competitive landscape, customer dynamics, buying process, and solution definition. When sellers understand elements of these 5 factors, they can then be on their way to defining and making sense of the buying situation and selecting the pattern of selling behavior that's most effective. But some interesting things came out when we interrogated the data around the buying factors. There was only one buying factor within all 25 of those buying factors that was significant in every buying situation we analyzed for our clients. And that was stage of the buying journey. So think psychology of decision making, think buyer psychology in the buying journey. So back to that point that situational fluency involves adjusting to the buyer's position in the buying process and adjusting to the persona you're facing, we say, yes, absolutely, that's part of the story. So when we think back to how this idea of buying stage and buyer persona fits into these broader categories of buying factors, what we know is that those 2 buying factors actually are only subsets of 2 of these 5 categories. So buyer personas are only one element of customer dynamics, and buying journey or buying stage is only one element of the buying process. So this idea of understanding the buying journey and orienting toward the buyer persona is important, but that's not necessarily the same as situational fluency or situational agility. In fact, we know that buying stage is necessary. It's a necessary ingredient to then be able to understand the buying situation you're facing. It's also necessary to determine which of these 4 sales strategies should I employ and execute. In addition, when we looked at how these 4 patterns of selling behavior work together, what we found is that consultative selling tactics are highly correlated to every one of these other strategies, and they're heavily used in every other strategy. So when people ask me, is consultative selling dead? Is Challenger the thing? Well, consultative selling is most certainly not dead. In fact, sellers that lack a solid foundation of consultative selling cannot make that great leap to situational agility, right? This is sort of the precursor or enabling set of skills that sellers need in order to then move to that next step. So this is what forms this final foundation or this final level of sales agility called foundational agility, which involves buyer psychology, decision psychology, and the buying journey. So when someone says, yes, we teach sales agility, what kind of sales agility do you teach? Is it foundational? Is it situational? Is it organizational? And what's your evidence, right? How did you come to these conclusions? Because if I'm one of these buyers of sales enablement solutions, I want evidence. I want to know, how did you come to these ideas and how do I know they work? And you should be asking those same questions. So now we switch to this idea of acquiring and mastering sales agility. how does a sales force become agile? If you're a sales enablement professional, how do you bring sales agility into your organization and deploy it across your organization? And this is where we come to one more sort of misleading perspective on sales agility. And that is the notion that sales agility is similar to and benefits from principles of agile software development. We know why that perspective is alive and well in the marketplace. It's intuitively appealing. Everybody's heard of agile software development. It's the thing that every software developer is doing. And so it's an intuitively appealing way to think about sales agility. The challenge, though, is it doesn't require evidence. It doesn't require studies comparing sales agility to software development and show why they're synonymous and similar. In fact, if you really peel back the onion on agile software development, what you'll realize is that there are some fundamental, meaningful differences between the two, which make agile software development an inappropriate context for sales agility. Let's take a look at what some of those elements are. When you look at agile software development, particularly the Scrum methodology, which is the most popular, most often deployed methodology in the agile software world, what they do is they have a team and they divide that team up into individual developers who do these sprints, these short sprints of development. And you think, okay, well, gosh, that sounds similar to sales, because in sales, you have these sort of mini closes and individual activities that lead to positive outcomes. And when you string those together, that's how you win a sale. So intuitively, it really does make sense. But here's where that analogy really falls flat. When you think about agile software development, the vision for the software is in entire complete control of the company developing the software. They own the vision, they own the development. When it comes to selling, the customer and the customer's vision are external to the seller's environment. They don't have control over that. At best, they can influence that. So one fundamental principle driving agile development has to do with who controls the vision. And what does that vision have to do with the control of the individual doing the work? The other issue with making the comparison between agile software development and sales agility is that agile software development is focused on individual developers having tiny portions of the overall project and working independently. That's exactly the opposite of what a salesperson does when pursuing a major sales opportunity. They have to corral and marshal all of the resources and coordinate those efforts and get everyone on the same page. So it's a group effort versus individual effort. So again, it's intuitively appealing, but not really accurate. So when you're talking with someone in this space who comes up with really good ideas, ask for the evidence. Ask, what research have you done that has led you to these conclusions? And why should I believe that and incorporate in my sales enablement efforts? So if the perspectives that are out there aren't necessarily sufficient or accurate, then where do we pull from in order to have a framework and model for agility that we can then take to the sales force? So the researchers at the Florida State University Sales Institute, when they found these original insights that high performers adapt to the situation and they display 4 patterns of behavior, they went to the sales training industry. They went to all the sales training companies to see who's teaching sales agility. And guess what? Nobody was. There was not one firm out there at that point teaching sales agility. And so what they had to do is look at other domains. They looked at the military. They looked at professional sports. They looked at first responders, because those are domains that have to actually train agility into the job, right? It's not a byproduct. It's an important component, an essential element of the actual job. So when you think about it, let's take fighter pilots as an example. The way to enable a fighter pilot to be agile is you have to think about these 3 core pillars. You have to think of situational intelligence, situational readiness, and situational fluency. And for a fighter pilot, what that means is they have to assess the situation they're facing. And it's usually pretty dire and it's real time. They also have to evaluate and assess that situation and determine the best path of action, effectively execute that action, and then monitor impact and results. So these 3 core pillars of agility are true in any and every domain where agility has to be trained into the role. including sales agility. So how do these three core pillars unfold for these different levels of sales agility that we've identified in the research? Let's take a look. For foundational agility, the sellers have to assess what buyer am I dealing with, what persona am I dealing with, and where are they in their buying journey. Once I'm able to tease that out, what I can then do is I can plan my next interaction in a way that's highly aligned to where that buyer is in the stage they are within their buying journey. Then they execute conversations differently at different stages, and they monitor buyer reactions. This is all about buyer psychology and psychology of decision making. Fundamental skills, sales skills that lead to incremental progress. So that is really the heart of this foundational level of agility. Again, there's no one size fits all. Different buyers are at different places in their buying journey. Different personas care about different things. But this foundational level is sort of a feeder or enabler to this next level of agility, which we call situational sales agility. And we call it situational agility because in order to be situationally fluent, you have to be able to assess beyond just buyer personas and buying stage. You have to be able to evaluate and assess these broader 5 categories to be able to seek the right information and make sense of the buying situation you're facing. You then need to choose not one path, but one among 4 different paths. Which one is most appropriate and best aligned and most likely to lead to a win based on the situation I'm facing? And then the seller has to execute the tactics within that strategy and constantly monitor buyer reactions and make adjustments. So it's this loop of continually assessing, choosing, and executing and monitoring feedback that allows sellers to be situationally agile and situationally fluent. The final level, which is this idea of organizational agility, involves ensuring that sales leaders and sales managers align market-facing sales activities with desired organizational results. Coach to those activities in consistent and meaningful and structured ways, and then monitor leading indicators of progress to determine, are the right needles moving in the right direction in order to indicate we're on the right track. If not, adjustments need to be made. Again, no one size fits all. So if I were in your shoes, what I'd be asking is, why do I care about this? Why do these 3 levels of sales agility matter to me? Why does thinking about agility in this way, how could that possibly help my organization? Well, I'm going to share with you just a few metrics that we've experienced in working with these different levels of agility with our clients. Clients who adopt practices for organizational agility drive 30% more of their sellers to quota. And you can see all of the data around that in the book, Crushing Quota. Organizations that implement situational agility get 20% more revenue per seller on average. And finally, those that incorporate foundational agility see things like dramatic increases in average selling price. So different organizations track different metrics, but in effect, organizations that are agile outperform organizations that aren't. So what are some key takeaways that you can consider as you move down the line of either becoming a more agile seller or enabling a more agile sales organization? How do you get sales agility embedded in your organization? Well, something that you should be thinking about is agile does not equal sales agility. There are 2 fundamentally different things that are intuitively appealing, but not necessarily related. Buyer personas in the buying journey are a piece of the puzzle, not the entire puzzle. Agility can be trained, but be careful. Ask for evidence, right? Don't just take someone's really effective message or story. Ask for sort of looking under the hood and seeing what evidence has led to these conclusions and frameworks. So what are some actions that you can take if you are motivated by this idea of sales agility? If this story resonates with you, you can read an article on sales agility by going to this link here that really talks about all the different levels of sales agility and what they mean. You can read an article about the original sales agility research that came out of the Florida State University Sales Institute and was validated by VantagePoint. You can watch a video about crushing quota, or you can contact me directly. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening to what VantagePoint has to say about sales agility and our evidence-based frameworks. And Bob, what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to you and see if there's any questions that the viewers have sent in.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Michelle Vazzana from VantagePoint Performance. We're happy to take some questions now, and we do have a few queued up, and we have 10 minutes or so that we can allocate toward these. So if you are interested in sharing a comment or question, we encourage you to do that. You can use the chat function on the site. It's a very small window. Apologize for that, but it's better if you pop it out. There's an option to do that. And then you're also welcome to email questions to us directly. And that email is shown on the screen now. So let's get to our first question. The first question is, if we're interested in adopting agility in our sales organization, should we have a bottoms-up approach or a top-down approach, which is best?
That is such a great question. And we are now getting that question all the time since these research findings have been shared with the marketplace at large. And the answer is you have to do both, right? Organizational agility is necessary in order to form a foundation for any kind of agility, whether it's foundation or situational. So organizational agility means you've prepared your managers and leaders to be able to connect sales activities with organizational results and take into consideration the market they're facing. That's always necessary. And getting managers with a sort of a framework for effective ongoing sales management is going to be a strong enabler of any sales enablement efforts that you have moving forward. The big question typically is between, do we start with foundational agility or situational agility? And it really depends where your sales force is with regard to those different platforms. So we have clients who say, we've been doing consultative selling for many years. Do we need to start there again? And the answer is no. If your sellers, Bob, there's some feedback coming. I don't know what that is. Do you hear that?
I don't hear it, but
okay, maybe it's just maybe I'm hearing things.
It's your inside. It's on the inside. Yeah, sometimes it happens to me. Yeah, let's tune those
sales
out.
enablement leaders can evaluate what's their level of confidence in their seller's ability to really understand the buying journey, the psychology of decision making, and be able to deal with different personas. So it's that sort of level. It's not basic, but it is foundational. And there are methods that organizations can use to assess that. There are assessments available that organizations can use to determine to what degree is my sales force effective at these more foundational elements of agility. If they have high confidence that their sales force is farther along, they've been through consultative selling, spin selling, maybe they've had challenger, maybe they're ready to move right to situational agility. But our feedback would be organizational agility is critical regardless. Whether you start with foundational and then move to situational or start specifically with situational has everything to do with your prior sales enablement efforts.
Good. Thank you. Great insights. We've got a couple of questions we're going to try to combine related to sort of measuring progress and metrics you might use. I'm going to read them verbatim,
Sure.
and hopefully they make sense together. The first says, may we assume that the metrics of sales agility are cumulative across foundational, situational, and organizational, the pyramid? The second question asks, how do we measure progress until we see results? What are forward indicating measures of good progress?
So the first point is really a great insight. And these metrics have a variety of influencers, right? So if I'm working with the sales force on foundational agility, I should see things like higher or more effective qualification. I might see things like shorter sales cycles. If I'm targeting different buyer personas or different segments, I might want to look at my pipeline and see, are the right kinds of deals in there? Are the right kinds of solution sets in there? Those are some of the metrics that relate directly to this foundational piece. When I think more about the next level of situational agility, what I'll be looking for there is how are sellers assessing the buying situations in ways that allow contrast? And are sellers exhibiting any of these other patterns of behavior as they pursue these deals? Some of the more recent research that we've done, Bob, identifies that consultative tactics are prevalent in every deal. Of the thousands of deals we analyze, they're present in every deal. But what's interesting is the highest use of consultative tactics are when sellers get involved early in the buyer's journey. The later the sellers get involved in the buyer journey, the less prevalent the use of consultative tactics, and the higher the use of competitive, disruptive, and financial tactics. So there's a bit of a sort of an interplay between the two. But ultimately, if you're looking for what metrics define effective sales agility, what you're going to want to look for is levels of qualification, conversion from stage to stage, shortened sales cycles, healthy pipelines with the right types of deals in the pipeline. So those are the more typical metrics that we see. And most organizations are already tracking those metrics anyway. So if they implement either a foundational or situational or organizational agility engagement, they should be able to track movement in those different metrics. Some clients of ours are choosing to use third-party evaluation services. We actually work with a group called Beyond ROI, and they are an objective third party that will come in and study the use of the different behaviors, levels of adoption of those behaviors, and impact on sales performance, and some of the leading indicators. So there's a variety of ways to decide the metrics and then measure the effectiveness.
Terrific. Let's try to get a couple more questions if we can. So question about talent. The questioner asks, are salesperson hiring profiles now shifting toward talent that fits into this agile idea?
You know, we're
or
not.
Should they? Maybe is a better question to ask. Should we now be changing the kind of people we're recruiting?
Well, so Gartner, with their sense-making research, has profiles now to identify sellers that have more of the sense-making attributes. There's a lot of companies out there that do hiring profiles. And what we do know is that sales agility is not only a skill set, but it's a mindset. And you can test for that mindset. And we know that the sellers that display the highest levels of sales agility display high curiosity. So they don't make quick assumptions and decisions. They're much more likely to thoroughly evaluate what they're facing before they act. So they spend a disproportionate time assessing what they're facing so they can select the best path. So that level of patience and curiosity is really critical from a profile perspective. We also know that sellers that are the most agile, they're more courageous, and they have the courage to go to places that don't necessarily have clear outcomes. They go places with their customers that are messy, right, and require collaboration to move forward. So there are some inherent attributes that make shifting to this agility, sales agility approach easier, I guess you could say. So I would expect to see more of that in the future.
Great. Let's try to get one more in. A questioner asks about personas. I'm paraphrasing their question now. It goes like this. We've spent a bundle on marketing personas. Can we use them now in the framework of trying to drive agility in sales?
Absolutely.
Do they still fit? Okay.
Personas are alive and well, just like consultative selling is alive and well. They're just a piece of a bigger picture. Buying is harder. It's more complex. You have larger buying teams, right, that are more risk averse, that are filled with these personas. And so the sellers that are the most agile not only understand the buying journey and the different buyer personas and where they are in that buying journey, they're effective at driving consensus amongst those different personas. And as they navigate that journey, adjusting their selling approach to align to the buying journey, the buyer persona, and the other dynamics that are at play in that buying situation. So yes, they're alive and well. It's money well spent, and it's highly leveraged in a sales agility approach.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you, Michelle. So sadly, we're out of time. I'll cut a discussion short there. And I just want to personally thank you for being with us again. Your stuff is always great, and
Thanks, Bob.
we love having you. So thank you very much, Michelle Vazzana from VantagePoint Performance.
Thanks, everyone.
And before we leave, I'll remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association presentation will take place later this week on Thursday. That's February 10th. We'll host a session then on reinforcing the impact of learning events. You can learn about this session and many others on our site under the Events tab. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thanks again for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.